In this video, I'm going to show you how to add interactivity to your buttons in Origami. I'll go over how to change color states of a button and how to make layers appear and disappear in your prototype. Let's get started. So to get started, I'm opening up an empty Origami file. If you're new to Origami and haven't used it before, I highly recommend watching an introductory video into this program. It's a little complicated to get started with at first, so I really recommend taking the time to watch an intro video before diving into this one. I'm going to go over the basics of interaction design within Origami. Origami is a prototyping tool created by Facebook, and with it you can create a lot of really cool interaction designs. So I am going to work on a design for an application. So to begin, I already selected iPad as my size, but you can switch it to a phone size if you'd like, or keep it as a tablet size. Then I'm going to go over here to this plus button and click it, and say I want to add a rectangle and place that layer. Immediately a rectangle appears on the screen with some default properties, so I will change the color of it, maybe make it a blue. I'll change the positioning of it, so I'll make it directly in the center of the screen by changing its anchor point. And then I'm going to change the width and the height of it. I'm also going to increase the radius so it has a little bit of a curve. I also want this button to have some text on it, so I will again go to this plus and then click text layer, place it. Over here in the typography settings, I can change the text of it, so I'm going to change it to submit. And as you can see, that also immediately went to the 00 part of the screen, so I want it in the center to match that button. So I'll again use that anchoring point to put it in the center of the screen. I'm also going to increase the size of this font considerably and the color. You can also change the weight of the font here, so I might make it semi-bold. And I'll take these two layers and put them in a group by holding Command G. I'm going to call it button. So right now when I click on this, obviously nothing happens because we've added no interactivity to this prototype yet, but ideally I want to click on this button and then I want something to happen. I'm going to take this button layer and select touch right here. And then I can decide what kind of interactivity I want to add to this. Do I want to add a tap, a scroll, swipe, drag? Hover is not accessible because we have an iPad prototype selected right now, so it won't let hover be accessible. But if we chose a computer or desktop prototype, hover would be accessible. I'm going to click tap, and once I do, I see this interaction patch now appears on the screen. So now when I tap on this, I see that certain things are being triggered in that interaction. So now I can use that firing of those interactions to make something else happen. So I want, when I tap on this, the color of this button to change and the text of this thing to change. So in order for something else to happen, we have to have a transition. So I'm going to double tap on the screen and type in transition for a transition patch. And then when I second click on the transition, I can select the type. Now there's various kinds of types that you can add, but right now I'm going to add a color transition. And when I click color, now I can specify the start and end colors for this. So I'm going to click start and use this eyedropper to select that blue color. And then for the end, I'm going to change it to a green. So now I want to say when this button is tapped, start this transition of that button from this color to that color. So with that rectangle layer selected in my panel, I can now take the end of this transition patch and connect it to the color variable in my specifications panel. So now I'm expecting that when I tap on this, there will be a transition from blue to green of this button. And when I tap on it, it flashes. Why does it flash? It's because that tap is only true after I've held down, and when I release it, then it turns on the interaction from the blue to the green, but it doesn't hold that state, it just flashes for a second. Well, I want this button to stay green when I tap it one time. So to do that, I need to add a switch patch. So I'm going to double tap again and write switch. And now I'm adding a switch patch, and a switch patch works just like a light switch. It's either on or it's off. So once that tap is true once, the switch will be turned on until I tell it to turn off. So instead of having the tap connected immediately to the transition, we're adding the switch in between the interaction patch and the transition patch. Tap will be connected to the turn on switch, and then the on off of the switch will be then connected to the transition. So now I have this intermediate step in between these two patches. So now I'm going to tap on this button and see what happens. I tap on it and now it's green, which is what I wanted to happen. So now that transition immediately went from the blue to the green, but I want to add some kind of animation to occur between that so it wasn't just a stark change. If I replay it using this button over here, if I click it again, you'll see that it goes straight from blue to green. I want to add some kind of animation between the two steps. So I'm going to double tap again and write animation. And there are multiple kinds of animations we can add. For right now, I'll just add a classic animation. And for right now, I'll just change the curve to this one. I'm going to change the switch and have this animation play between the switch and the transition. So I'm going to connect this on-off switch with that number patch, the result of this going into that transition, and so when I replay it, I should see an animation between the two states. So I click, and now it animates. So I'm going to take this and drag it over a bit, and then add that animation here. You can change this curve so that'll have a different effect on how it animates. See this one? That one kind of pops versus this one. More subtle. So I kind of like the in-out for this one. I might want to make it a little bit longer, maybe 1 second. So replay. Now let's change the text on this button so that animates as well when the button is pressed. So right now I want to add some other interactivity to this button so it's not just changing the color, but I want the text to also change. So right now we have this text layer and it's set to submit, but I want it to go away for a few seconds and then reappear and say something else. So what I might want to do is that I want to change this layer to a different state. So I'm going to actually double click here and write a transition patch and change this from 1 to 0 of the opacity of this layer. So I'm going to make this layer disappear. So I'm going to turn the switch of this transition on and then transform the opacity of this text layer. So I'm going to connect the 0 of this transition to the opacity of that layer. And immediately submit disappeared because we're already in the second state. So if I refresh the prototype and I click, the text immediately disappears, the color transitions to green. I might want to add a little bit of an animation that occurs here. So I'll double click here and write classic animation. I could also connect it to this classic animation, but then these two things would occur at the very same time. So I'll just do that quickly so you can see what that would be like. But if I took that classic animation, applied to that transition, it occurs at exactly the same time, which may be the effect that you're going for, but I actually want the text to disappear first, and then I want this animation to continue. I would want this to occur rather quickly, so I'll put 0.2 seconds of this kind of curve. So when I refresh and I click, the text disappears first and then it still transitions to the green. So I might want to actually expand this transition so it occurs a little bit more slowly to clearly indicate that difference. Next, I want a check mark to appear when this process is done. I'm actually just going to import this icon of this check mark that I have and just renaming here icon check. So I know that it is the icon for that. And if I hover over it, it's arbitrarily put randomly on the screen, but I want to center it like everything else and make the 0, 0. It's also quite small right now, so I'm going to increase its scale, so I'll just bump it up. So now if I refresh, the check mark is always visible, which I don't want to be the case. I only want the check mark to appear after the transition has fully changed to green. So when that switch turns on, if I know that this animation is going to take 2 seconds to go from blue to green, I'm going to want to include an animation of that icon. So now I've added this icon check. I'm adding a classic animation that'll occur in 0.4 seconds. Then adding a transition to that for 0 to 1 of the opacity of the icon check, and then linking it up to the opacity in the inspector panel. So now when I refresh the prototype and click it, immediately the submit button disappears, the check icon appears. It seems like the check appears too quickly, so I actually want the check to wait a second or two before it appears. So I'm going to add a wait patch. So I'm going to double click and add a wait patch. And wait patch just causes a time delay in between different patches. So I'm going to connect the switch patch to the wait patch, the start of it, and have that wait set to true when 1 second has passed. So then I will connect it to that classic animation. Again, refreshing the prototype and clicking the button, the icon now appears after 1 second. So I hope you enjoyed this video going over how to add interactivity to buttons using Origami. Origami is a really great prototyping tool that I use to create interactive prototypes for user testing. Please let me know if you have any questions about the topic and I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks for watching!